Alrighty, the riots in France have only gotten worse since we last spoke. It would seem that the situation is very much out of control at this point. And yesterday, I didn't really talk about the situation on the ground. I talked about the background and sort of my apathy towards the situation. But even if I'm apathetic about the end results, it is still hard to turn away from a train wreck. And that's what this is. France is spiraling out of control, and this is not, it's hard to say because the term normal riots just sounds ridiculous. But in France, riots are somewhat normal. They happen. And the French people historically have rioted over political issues. In the case of the Yellow Vests, it was a tax on fuel. In other cases, it's been riots as a result of striking workers and all sorts of other political issues, tangible issues, things that can be answered. And oftentimes the rioters actually have, a stated political goal, and there's a roadmap for, if the government was interested in trying to appease them. That is not the case with these riots in France. I don't think that you can really lump these in with standard French riots. This isn't a garden variety French riot outbreak. This is, as I said yesterday, the migrant population, and I sort of hesitate to call them that because they're not all migrants, but these are people who identify as migrants. These are people who see themselves as not French, even if they are perhaps third-generation French citizens in many cases. This is the non-French population rising up and saying that they are done with the authority of the French population. They don't want to listen to them anymore. And there's nothing that somebody like Macron could tell these people that would get them to obey his commands. They're done with him. They're done with all of the French people. They want to be in power now. That's what this is about. They're not rioting because they want, civil rights. They're not rioting because they want to be treated equally, or else they wouldn't be, burning down buildings and attacking innocent bystanders. These are people who feel they have no power because they are minorities in this society. They are not the ruling class. They understand that. They are the underclass. And they would like to achieve power. They see weakness in the French state. They've identified a clear weakness. And they're exploiting it. They're acting in their own rational self-interest. Now, it might not work out for them in the end. That's a calculation that you have to make. But I think the goals of the riots, very clearly, are to achieve an increase in political power for the non-French peoples of the French Republic. As I said yesterday, these are not people who are content to try and blend in and assimilate into existing French society. These are people who have the mindset of colonizers, people who live in a different country than their ancestors, but who want to maintain the same culture, traditions, language of their forefathers, of their grandparents, and the same culture, language, and traditions that are still practiced in the old country. And so they are asserting themselves as stakeholders in the new country. What they are trying to express here, even if they are doing it unconsciously, what they are in effect expressing is that France is no longer just French. France is a combination of French, Algerian, Arab, West African, and probably even more ethnicities. Obviously, West African is not an ethnicity, it's a part of the world. But French West Africa covered so many, and they still accept immigrants from those former colonies. It's so many different ethnicities. I'm not going to try and memorize them all. I don't focus enough on that part of the world to learn them. But anyway, this to me reminds me a bit of Lebanon. That's what France is turning into. There was once upon a time when the Maronite Christians of Lebanon were the dominant ruling class. And as the population proportions shifted in Lebanon, and not only that, as the other groups in society became more politically self-aware, they agitated for more power and influence, which manifested itself in a long, drawn-out civil war. And so now, the Lebanese government is such that Maronites, Sunnis, and Shia all have to share power. They all have different roles in the government, and they have power that is reserved for each one of those three groups. The president of Lebanon is always a Maronite. I think it's the prime minister is always a Sunni, and the Speaker of the Parliament is always a Shia. I think that's how it goes, although I might have Prime Minister and the Speaker mixed up. And that has not resolved all ethnic tensions, but that was one answer to it. And I'm not saying that that would work in France. I don't think it will. I don't think that if you have, a white French president, an Algerian Prime Minister, and a West African Speaker of the Parliament, or whatever it's called, Speaker of the National Assembly, maybe, is that the title in France? I don't think that that would solve France's political problems, not at all. But it's an example of how the minorities' quest for more political influence have, a direction that it could go. They want to be recognized as separate constituents of the state. They do not like that the French state ostensibly caters to French people. Because if to the extent that the French state prioritizes the well-being of French people, the state is disregarding, undermining, or perhaps even working against their best interests, the best interests of the non-French people. French society and French government was not built by them or for them. And therefore, I think that in the minds of many of them, they've decided it'd be better just to tear that down because it does not benefit them. And in the process, they might be able to enrich themselves through looting and at least get something out of this whole situation. These are people who don't feel valued by French society. And I'm not saying that they are right. I'm not saying that I have sympathy for them. I have sympathy for neither side. And I don't mean that to say that I see that both sides has merit. I don't think that both sides have merit. I think that both sides are wrong in different ways. And I think both sides deserve to lose. I wish that the French regime was defeated, just not by these people. When you see someone attack a state and a society and seek to tear it down, you have to ask yourself what they will replace it with. And if it is obvious that they will replace it with something even worse, then yes, I'm not going to support tearing down a state and society that I happen to dislike, think is corrupt, or even evil. I don't like France, but I dislike Algeria and West Africa more. And I don't just mean that as a matter of taste. Oh, I don't like their architecture as much. I mean those places are even more dysfunctional than France. That they are effectively even less free. That they are less prosperous. And that they are a greater blight on humanity. People like to act like all forms of, or all examples of colonialism are equally evil. That is not true. There is a case to be made that colonialism is always, on net, a bad thing, and that it shouldn't happen. That all countries should be free of outsiders trying to come in and conquer their society and turn it into something different than what it is. You can say that that's always wrong, but it's not always wrong to the same degree. French people going into Algeria and trying to make Algeria more like France is not as bad as Algerians going into France and trying to make France more like Algeria. It's okay to admit that. And don't pretend like it's not true. I forget what year France first conquered and started to colonize Algeria. I think it was in the 1850s, maybe. But let's just go back to before those countries were all associated with one another. Let's look at like 1810. Okay? In 1810, would you rather be born in France or would you rather be born in Algeria? I don't think I have to answer that for you. And if one of those two countries were to, if these two countries were to be merged and they were going to be homogenized and both countries would end up with basically the same society, would you rather those two countries end up looking like France? Or would you rather those two, in 1810, or would you rather those two countries end up looking like Algeria in 1810? And so that's why that's where I'm at with this current uprising against the French government. If this uprising was an effort to make France a freer and more prosperous and more orderly society, a society where people lived better lives and they were safer and happier, well, sure, I'd support that. Because the status quo in France is not good. But instead, this uprising seeks to destroy what little order, prosperity, and safety is left in France. And for that reason, I condemn it, and all those, well, I shouldn't be, you know what, I don't want to be that broad with it. Let's just say it's a bad thing, okay? I'll leave it at that. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow, and I don't think I'll be talking about France.